Rob here, and in this video we're going to be looking at Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation and how it relates to audiences and Henry Jenkins' concepts of fandom. So, what are we particularly looking at? Obviously, like the other videos in this series, this is about Component 1, Media Products, Industries and Audiences, all of which relate to Section B. You're not going to get any video game questions in Section A, so you're not going to be expected to textually analyse anything. So, as you can see, this section covers media industries, audiences, and media context, and we're going to principally be looking at media audiences in this video. So, in this section, learners will develop knowledge and understanding of key aspects of media industries, including the significance of ownership and funding, the role of regulation in global production and distribution, the impact of digitally convergent platforms, and the effect of individual producers on the media industries. Okay, all of that's going to be covered in different videos. What we're going to be looking at in this video is this next bullet point. Learners will study media audiences. We've done a little bit of that already, but we're going to do a bit more in this video. We're going to consider aspects of the targeting of mass and specialised audiences. Again, I've done a little bit of that in other videos. We're going to do more of it here. The categorisation and construction of audiences, as well as how audiences use and respond to media and how that is used to help reflect their identity, to help construct their identity. It reflects the social, cultural and historical circumstances of the world and the industry that made these products. So remember, these are the things that you could find in Section B. Tide and Water Aid could go in either Section A or Section B. Black Panther and I, Daniel Blake is only Section B. The Daily Mirror of the Times can go in Section A or Section B. Late Night Woman's Hour is Section B only, and so is Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation. Just to remind you, we need to be considering Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation in its context as a contemporary action-adventure stealth game, and think about it in terms of relevant industry and the audience issues it illustrates. And I would highly recommend getting hold of the game and playing it, just so you've got some idea of what it's like. I wouldn't recommend it in terms of being a good game, but you know, it's cheap. As I said, I got it for about £7 from Steam, and it was only, when I bought it on PlayStation 3, it was only £3. So it's an old game, you should be able to pick it up pretty cheap. Nonetheless, at the very least, you should watch some walkthrough videos, so I've put in this playlist, and I'll do some of my own, I think, as well, and put them on there too. So, which bits are we particularly looking at? Not so much any of this, we've really covered this in other videos. Mainly we're going to be looking at this kind of stuff. So we have already looked a bit about grouping and categorization, but we'll do a bit of that in this video. Not so much that one. A little bit of that, I guess, and that one. This one possibly. Yeah, definitely that one. To a certain extent, yeah. Yes, definitely. Yes. Right. So most of this, frankly. So what are the key theories you need to be looking at here? Well, first and foremost, we've got Henry Jenkins' fandom theory. So his idea was that fans are active participants in the construction and circulation of media text. That we aren't just passive consumers, just accepting everything that's given to us. So what he's talking about kind of rejects the kind of like Albert Bandura media effects model where, you know, we just accept everything we're told, like Podermic Needle and Harold Laswell kind of idea. He's saying that audiences are not that manipulatable. They're not that simple. To a certain extent, he's the kind of person who'll be more agreeing with Stuart Hall, talking about how different audiences use different media and respond to different media in different ways. So he says that fans appropriate texts. They read them in ways that were not fully authorised by the media producers, or what he called textual poaching. Remember when I was in the other video I was talking about how the Babadook became adopted by gay audiences, and the Babadook himself became something of a bit of a gay cult icon. Well, Jennifer Kent, who wrote and directed that film, never had any intention that it was going to be a film about the experience of being homosexual in the 21st century, and yet that's how gay audiences reacted to it. They saw something of their own experience in that film, and they took it to heart. That's what we call textual poaching. The fans construct their social and cultural identities through borrowing and inflecting mass culture images, and they're part of a participatory culture that has a social dimension. The idea of modern fan culture dates back to the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. The two sort of like cultural artifacts that first really developed massive fandoms were Charles Dickens and his books that were hugely successful, and Sherlock Holmes. Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories were huge, and they had a massive fandom, to the extent that, spoiler alert, when he killed off Sherlock Holmes in one of his stories, there was such a massive public outcry that he had to bring the character back. You know, Conan Doyle was like mobbed practically everywhere he went. He was a superstar, right? So that's the beginning of it. But the modern beginnings of fandom as we know it date back to the 1960s and Star Trek. Star Trek and Trekkers, as they like to be called nowadays, or Trekkies as they're often called, a bit disparagingly, pretty much invented modern fan culture, nerd culture as you might call it, geek culture, whatever you want to call it. Back in the 60s, you know, they were the first people to be doing conventions, they were the first people to be writing fan fiction, doing fan art and all this kind of stuff as a community. So, you know, then we had Star Wars, and then we had, you know, Harry Potter and all these other fan communities that have built up. So a lot of this is built around geek culture, whether it be science fiction, fantasy, comic books, etc., video games. But don't forget, it's not, you know, being the kind of person who translates, you know, William Shakespeare into Klingon and, you know, dresses up as a Jedi to go and see midnight screenings of Star Wars is no stranger or more or less geeky than the kind of person who, you know, dresses up in replica kits, paints their face and goes and watches a football match on the weekend. And, you know, knows the, you know, first 11 of every county cricket team going back to 1863, whatever. Do you know what I mean? That is equally geeky behaviour. It's still fandom, it's just a more socially accepted kind of fandom, right? And many people will completely shape their sense of self and identity around their fandoms, okay? And they will reappropriate these things for their own uses. One of the early examples of this was the idea of slashlit, in which gay Star Trek fans would basically write gay Star Trek erotica. That's the beginnings of, you know, fanfic or fan fiction as we get it today. Don't forget, 50 Shades of Grey was actually a fan fiction, a piece of Twilight fan fiction that got repurposed into a standalone book. Obviously this then ties in with David Gauntlett and his theories of identity, this idea that the media provide us with the tools and resources we use to construct our identities. So many people construct our identities around fandom. The idea that whilst in the past the media tended to convey singular, straightforward messages about ideal types of male and female identities, the media today offers a more diverse range of stars, icons and characters from whom we may pick and mix different ideas. So this is definitely something where Assassin's Creed 3 falls in, because having a black female protagonist, this goes against the singular, straightforward type of identity for video game characters you usually get. You know, people like, or characters I should say, like Lara Croft notwithstanding, you know, the majority of protagonists of video games are masculine or male. Even when you've got the chance to change them yourself, a lot of games give you the option, don't they? And will come with character building levels that allow you to, you know, adjust the gender and skin colour and hair type and whatever, body type even, of your characters, to the point you can manipulate them to look as much like whatever you want as possible. So we're not going blanket, all men everywhere in video games here. We can also bring in Clay Shirky's end of audience theories, the idea the internet and digital technology have a profound effect on the relationship between media and individuals. Well, obviously, when you've got a fan community for your property, whatever it might be, you might want to engage with that fan community. There's a big thing about fan service at the moment, and how a lot of media content producers are bending over backwards to facilitate fan communities and sort of like give them what they want. I mean, a lot of fuss about, say, the most recent Star Wars movies and to what extent they were too much fan service at the expense of actually being any good as movies. That kind of thing. But again, as we said, fans are able to repurpose media to their own usage in ways in which the original content creators may not be particularly happy about. So, the idea that the audience as a mass of passive consumers isn't really tenable in the age of the internet. Were audiences ever really that passive? Hard to say. Some people say yes, some people say no. But in a world where media consumers are becoming producers themselves, they are prosumers with the ability to speak back to the media in various ways, whether it be through YouTube comments, fan forums, comments on websites, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever social platform you want to mention, even good old email. The consumer can speak back to the producer, sometimes directly, as well as creating and sharing content with one another. So we have our own little, if you've got a computer, if you've got a smart device, you can produce your own media. You can produce your own reaction videos, for example. You can produce your own criticism. You want to critique and review films and video games, not a problem, shove them on YouTube. You want to do, videos or streams on something like Twitch or YouTube of you playing video games and talking about them as you're doing it, there's nothing stopping you anymore. And content creators have to be aware of that. So, as we said in an earlier video, a stereotype of what a gamer is probably inaccurate. And as we can see, we tend to think of video gaming being predominantly male activity, but the statistics don't back that up. We've got a variety of different statistics from a variety of different sources that might differ slightly, but they essentially point to the fact that the male-female gender split of gaming is essentially 50-50. I mean, as you see, this one says 52 male, which means 48 female, but, it's near enough half and half as to be statistically insignificant. The idea that video gaming being something predominantly aimed at youth, again, is not that true. And we'll be looking at between 21 and 50 being the average gaming age. And people gaming more than once a month. And that 50% watch video content to do gaming, so that might be, YouTube videos, walkthroughs, playthroughs, let's plays, Twitch streams, even increasingly esports. Here we are sat in the middle of the COVID-19 lockdown, and where the ordinary sporting calendars have been shut down, esports have almost been filling the gap. I mean, notably, last night I was watching the Chinese E-Prix, in which they, real Formula 1 drivers were doing the Chinese Grand Prix using the Codemasters Formula 1 video game. Charles Leclerc won it. That's taken the place of the actual Grand Prix. So, with televised commentary and everything. So, you know, video games are not this kind of niche underground thing. They are very much mainstream media activity. And in an earlier video we looked at the average audience for Assassin's Creed 3. I couldn't find Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation. It'd be interesting to see whether the gamers of Liberation may have been slightly more skewed towards a female audience. Somehow, I doubt it personally. I don't think women will pick up a video game just because it's got a female protagonist. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a woman. But I find that unlikely, and personally, having a female protagonist in the video game is not going to stop me playing it. I really like the Far Cry games. I'm playing Far Cry 5 at the moment, and I'm playing it as a female character. It makes no difference to the game. You can only see the hands. Yeah? But I picked a female character because why not? Because I could. So, as you can see here, the demographic for Assassin's Creed is male. It's 25 to 39. It's ABC1. Slightly left wing. Got a reasonable amount of disposable income. How does that compare to the average gamer? As we can see, much the same. 25 to 39 and male, right? But as you can see, Assassin's Creed 3 tends to have a more ABC1, whereas the average male gamer is more C2DE. So, interesting why perhaps Assassin's Creed 3 might have a more middle class audience. Maybe it's its relationship to history. Maybe the historical element appeals to a more educated audience. I don't know, that's just pure speculation. Again, quite northern according to these, aren't they? Look, well, not so much. That's north of England, I guess, or northwest. This is very much very top of Scotland, but presumably it's far too cold to go and do anything else. But as we see the full data, 25 to 39 year olds represent 45, nearly 46% of that demographic, with 18 to 24 year olds pulling in 27%, and 40 to 54 year olds being 18%, well, nearly 19%, and 55 plus only 8.4%, which is unsurprising, really. And in terms of the C2DE, it's 54.6 versus 45.4, so it's not that much different. Right. Now, how does this relate to Assassin's Creed 3? Well, this is Jim Ryan, he's the CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment. And according to this article, Sony has confirmed that it's planning to target, with the upcoming release of the PlayStation Vita, lots of audiences, from the regular core gamers to even the female demographic, which in the mind of PlayStation Europe boss Jim Ryan is the untapped holy grail of gaming. So what does this imply? If it's an untapped holy grail, it's suggesting that women are not core gamers. Now, from the statistics, it shows us that the male-female split of gaming is fairly equal. So what does this mean? Well, it seems I would suggest that by core gamers, they mean the hardcore gamers. The people who spend a lot of time playing video games, probably on home platforms like, PlayStation, Xbox, or PC, as opposed even to more casual ones like Nintendo. And certainly not the more casual gaming that we might associate with mobile gaming, say on mobile phones, or even things like, Nintendo DS's and, PlayStation PSP at the time, before it was replaced by the PlayStation Vita, which has just been discontinued, by the way. You can't get the PlayStation Vita anymore, and as far as I know, they're not replacing it with anything. I think I might be wrong. But what they're trying to do here is sell more hardcore games like Assassin's Creed to the non-hardcore gamer. And obviously they're suggesting that women are that target audience. So what have they done? Well, they've given it a female protagonist. There's another thing you can do in Assassin's Creed Liberation, which you can't do in other games so much, is change the character's clothing. Well, you can't change it, you have different clothing. So you've got your typical assassin's clothes, which are really good for fighting in. You can climb anything in them. Then there's a slave outfit, which is good for stealth because nobody notices them, and they can do a bit of climbing. But there's also a lady dress, which is like a full-on sort of like 1700s upper class woman's dress, in which you can't do any climbing and you can't really do any fighting, but you can charm your way into situations, which in a way you could argue is a bit of a almost sexist way of doing things. You think, ooh, different costumes, that'll appeal to the women. I don't know. Negotiated reading, or maybe even oppositional reading if you want to know. So as I said, Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation features a female protagonist. As I said, that is unusual, especially in this franchise. There are other female characters in the Assassin's Creed franchise. But you could see this as a deliberate attempt to try and target this otherwise untapped Holy Grail target audience. So the existence of a female protagonist may also be discussed in terms of constructing audiences by asking whether this game might offer a platform for female gamer identification. Now this is an interesting question in terms of to what extent do the gamers associate and identify with the characters they are playing. Now, I've talked about in the past about how the media offers us aspirational role models that we might base our identity on. So people like David Gauntlett and Stuart Hall have talked about this. And we see these aspirational role models and we want to be like them, whomever they are. Maybe it's, I don't know, James Bond or Madonna or, you know, Lady Gaga or RuPaul or whoever it is you want to pick, right? You might have these people who you idolize and you want to be a little bit like them. So you copy their behaviors, you copy the way they dress, you copy the, you know, the way they talk, things like that, right? Do we do this with video games? Well, there are certainly lots of people out there who like doing things like cosplaying as video games, dressing up at them, and they themselves have got their fans and stuff like that. You might, I suppose, but I mean, how many people think, oh, you know, that Sonic the Hedgehog is a real aspirational role model. I want to be like him, running around collecting rings. Probably not many, unless you're a furry or something. There's, you know, but, you know, you got characters like Lara Croft who've, you know, gone on to be movie characters too. You know, you've got, what other kind of big crossover video game characters have there really been? Not an awful lot, quite frankly. Not in that respect. You know. But there are interesting questions about to what extent are you controlling your avatar versus being your avatar? Do you inhabit that character? Do you become that character? Do you identify with them? Or are you merely controlling them? I put a link in this playlist to a really good PBS Ideas channel video on that. In fact, I'll put a couple of PBS Ideas channel videos relating to like gender in video games, principally The Sims. But they're fascinating, highly worth watching. I really miss the PBS Ideas channel. But, you know, it's an interesting question to what degree do I identify with these characters. And this has all sorts of important questions it brings up when you've got a female black protagonist. Now, to what extent would someone like me, a middle-aged 21st century white cisgender male, identify with a black, you know, Regency period female character in a video game? Does it even matter? Am I just controlling that avatar? Am I being that avatar? Do I empathize with that character? to what extent do we ever empathise with characters in video games? How often do we watch video games that really, or play video games, I should say, that really emotionally engage us? I mean, the last one I can think of for me would have been The Last of Us, which is a masterpiece. So, it's interesting. The question is, would female gamers or black gamers be more likely to want to play this character? Would it have a different effect on them than it would on another audience? I mean, it's off tangent, but in a way, but I thought Black Panther was a god-awful movie. It bored me witless. I just thought it was poorly made and dull. But I've got black friends who were practically in tears watching it because it meant something very different to them. It's presumably clouded up the fact that it's awful. But, these are questions that we need to consider. And don't forget, there's this stereotype of video gaming as being a very solitary activity, or at least it used to be. Is that still the case? Because there's very much a social element to video gaming nowadays in particular. Video gaming, online multiplayer gaming, which is something that was one of the big selling points of Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, is a big deal. We are social animals. We get together, we play games, we form clans, we play together, we play against one another, we play cooperative games. Online gaming has changed the nature of video gaming as an experience from a more solitary one into a more of a group activity. Well, I think that was always the case, to be honest. Where you might, even before you had online gaming, when I was a kid, you might do, I play a level, hand off the controller to my mate or my brother or whatever, he plays a level, then he gives it back to me. So I think it's always been a community-based thing, to be honest. And fans can be passionate exponents of a game, or even as harsh as critics. Fans are often the harshest critics of, the things they love. And that can impact the development of the game directly. I mean, game producers, just like any other media producers, will react to fan reactions. I mean, the big things lately, of course, was the Sonic the Hedgehog movie and how the backlash from fans forced them to completely redesign the character. So, with the existence of things like forums, bulletin boards, message boards, comment sections, all these kind of things, they allow people to communicate with one another, to have a social community aspect. And fans are active participants in the construction and circulation of media texts. Fan culture can involve things like going to Comic-Cons and fan festivals and stuff like that. Cosplay, where people dress up as their favourite characters. You can buy Assassin's Creed 3 Avelinda Dupree costumes off the internet. People make their own. They take photographs, they make little fan films, they do fan art. They've got all sorts of different ways in which people help to form their own identity through these characters, through taking these characters and identifying through them in some way. They create their own media texts. So this idea that fans appropriate texts and read them in ways that are not fully authorized by the media producers. This is the textual poaching thing. So here we've got some examples of fan art. Specifically in two of these cases, an example of what they call shipping, in which fan audiences will imagine relationships between their favourite characters that may not be in the game themselves. You'll quite often get, as I said, Star Trek started this with Slashlit, which was basically gay Star Trek erotica, usually involving Mr. Spock and Captain Kirk. But this kind of thing is still common now. Um, as I've already said, 50 Shades of Grey started off as Twilight fan fiction, on the subject of which fanfic or fan fiction. The idea that, again, we textually poach these things. There are massive amounts of fan fiction on the internet. I think the longest piece of fiction ever written is a piece of video game fan fiction. I can't remember what it was for now. But, people take these characters and they make them their own, and they reimagine them in different contexts, and they use them to create their own art, in inverted commas. So, as we said, fans can construct their social and cultural identity through borrowing and inflecting mass culture images that are part of this participatory culture, and it has a vital social dimension. Now, that could be IRL, in real life, away from the keyboard, where people meet up, they cosplay, they do live action role playing, they, make their own costumes, they do parkour videos if you're a Assassin's Creed fan, or they make their own fan fiction. They might have their own Instagram accounts or whatever, and they use this as a way to form their personal identity and to have a social life, essentially. And these also exist not just in real life but in the cyberspace, as opposed to meat space, the real world. So, in cyberspace, on the internet, on social media, in forums, in chat rooms, in bulletin boards, in whatever, right? Nonetheless, it just shows you that this is very much a social activity, fandom. I'm sure there are plenty of you who've got your own fandoms and your own little geeky things that you love. And the media producers can't ignore this. This, for example, is Ubisoft's own forum. There are all sorts of unofficial forums, but this is theirs. Where people can ask for help, they can give each other help, they can get support, they can do all sorts of different things. Okay, so it's got a social dimension and a community. I think it's a common word to use for this, especially when you're bringing in social media. Like we've got social media icons up there, and you've got your Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Another one I don't recognise, whatever that is. So, bring in this element as well. And there's a long history of people creating their own Fanworks. So I will put some videos on this playlist of fan films, for example, and footage from cosplay competitions and stuff like this, to give you some idea of what we're talking about. And I'll put some parkour videos on there as well, people doing that. There was at one time a history of content producers stamping down hard on anyone who misused their copyright, because essentially if you put an Assassin's Creed 3 cosplay video on YouTube, you are violating Ubisoft's copyright. You are using their characters and intellectual property in such a way as that it might profit you, especially if you've got your monetized YouTube channel, for example. So, once upon a time, they would clamp down on this kind of thing hard. Paramount, who used to own the copyright for Star Trek, I still do, were pretty brutal about this. Lucasfilm started off being like that about Star Wars stuff. But they soon came to the realization, especially in the last 10 years or so, but that's cutting off your nose to spite your face. If you're talking about the kind of people who are that obsessed with your, whatever it is, you've got your property, that they are willing to make a movie about it in their own time, and you're suing them, then you're attacking your core fan base. So nowadays, content owners tend to be more lenient about people creating their own fan material, artwork, providing it doesn't in some way damage the brand. So, you know, if you're making Assassin's Creed pornography, they're going to get sued. If you're doing, you know, you wanted to make a Star Wars fan film, but it was like a, you know, horror porn, torture porn kind of Saw video, but set in Star Wars, you might get shut down because, you know, they're supposed to be U certificate PG films that aren't, you know, family movies. So content creators, content copyright holders are becoming more lenient about this kind of thing, but still they've got to protect their brand, right? They don't want anybody harming their brand or profiting from it, because it's, you know, copyright theft. Right, so that's just a brief overview of the kinds of things you can talk about here. I've given some examples in the PowerPoint, but I've also linked a lot more into the YouTube video channel, so you can go and see some examples of that. Again, go and do a bit of research and a bit of Googling, see what you can find. And don't forget that even if it's not about Assassin's Creed per se, you know, you may very well yourself be a member of some kind of fandom, and your own personal experience can be brought into this and adapted. Okay? So, that's that video. If you've got any questions, you know where I am, and I'll see you in the next one.